Welcome, everyone, to our NCAA Social Series. This is episode 57. I'm Andy Katz. On this episode, we're going to discuss the Asian American Pacific Islander Alliance here. And there's been a lot of talk, obviously, in the community at large in this country. Thankfully, there was just passed in the Congress and the Senate, and President Biden should be signing this, the Anti-Asian Hate Crime Bill. Passed overwhelmingly in the Senate, got through the Congress, and now clearly it will get signed by President Biden. So there's been a lot of news on this topic and also in the college space. And I'm pleased to be joined by three distinguished guests here. Amy Huchthausen, the commissioner of the America East Conference, a former student athlete in Division III in softball at University of Wisconsin lacrosse. Chelsea Kung, she is a women's tennis player at Yale, obviously has been remote this year with the Ivy not playing sports nationally or within the league, but she will be back as a rising junior. And Patrick Summers, who is the commissioner of the New England Women's and Men's Athletic Conference and was a former tennis player himself at Division III Wheaton College. First, Amy, I want to start with you, just your overall reaction to what has happened nationally, and then we'll take it on the collegiate side of, everything that's gone on this year with a rise in hate crimes on the Asian American Pacific Islander community, and your reaction to at least now this acknowledgement that there will be this anti-Asian hate crime bill that certainly, will drive more attention to it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us, Andy. Really appreciate it. I mean, this year has been wild in every sense of in any sense that you could define it, right? From the pandemic and dealing with things like Chelsea's experience over the past year to testing and all of those types of things. So that alone was a lot for any individual in the society to deal with. And then you layer on the events of last summer with respect to George Floyd and the rise in social justice, the social justice movement nationally and within college sports and on college campuses really last summer. And that just fed into, I think, some of the issues over the last few months and the rise and really the visibility, because it's not like these things weren't happening before. It just has caused an increase in the visibility of anti-Asian discrimination and hate. So I think it's, like anything, it sometimes takes a tragedy for people to pay attention and notice. But one of the silver linings is that there's more visibility and people talking and acknowledging and being aware of these issues, whether you identify as AAPI or not. I just think there's been sort of an awakening on what's been transpiring in this country for decades, but certainly has come into much sharper focus over the last several months.
Yeah, I mean, obviously these, horrific people are blaming the AAPI community on the pandemic just because it originated in China, no fault of their own. I'm just curious before we move on, and I want to go around our Zoom room here. Amy, what have you experienced, if anything, in this past year?
I've been really fortunate, Andy, to be honest with you, even throughout my life, as I've tried to reflect on things, I've not been the subject of anything severe or hateful, at least in an overt way. And that has been the case over the last few months. I'm also, though, I acknowledge that I'm blessed to live in a city in Boston, and really a particular part of Boston in Cambridge, where there are more Asian Americans walking around than Caucasian people or any other race for that matter. So I recognize the good fortune I have where I currently live. But I will say that it has, elevated, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the visibility. It's certainly raised red flags for me in ways that I've never done before in my life. I was thinking of flying to San Antonio for the women's basketball championship after some of the incidents and events that caused some attention for that championship in March. And one of the reasons why I didn't go, and I'm not afraid to admit it, is that it was about a week or so after the event in Atlanta. And for the first time in my life, me being Korean American crossed my mind, and maybe it was something like, hey, you need to pay attention to that and be thinking about that as you travel about the country. And so it wasn't the determining factor why I didn't go to San Antonio, but it was certainly a contributing factor in my decision making.
Chelsea, same kind of deal. Your reaction first to the national attention thankfully, that has been brought in DC, and maybe your own personal experience growing up or even at Yale.
Yeah, I'd love to speak on that. I think the events that have been happening, I just want to take note that these events, unfortunately aren't new. As Amy said, they've been happening for so long. And something that I've grappled with is kind of understanding and how to grapple with the fact that, these hate crimes originated like back in March, and there was no news coverage, no national television covering it. And yet, my social media, I follow quite a few Asian American news accounts. It was just hate crime after hate crime. And back in March, this was happening, and it's still happening. Every single time I open up my social media, I'm reading about a new hate crime. It's just devastating. That said, I do want to acknowledge my own experience. I think I've also been very privileged in the fact that, I've never had to grapple with anything detrimental and nothing very serious. I think I've had to deal with, the microaggressions, the stereotypes. I grew up in Texas. I grew up in a very white area. I think that really changed like my outlook on how I present myself as an Asian American, as a Chinese woman. I stopped bringing leftover Asian food that my mom had made for dinner the past night for lunch. I wasn't eating kimchi at lunch. It was just like I was eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And that was just like something that I had to do because I just felt so kind of out of place at times and very isolated. That said, I think coming to Yale has been so eye-opening for me and so amazing. And in the sense that I've created such a community here. I am so close with my teammates, many of whom are Asian. I'm so close with my friends, and I'm so close with the various groups that I'm a part of. And I think something that's really just helped my confidence is the fact that so many people at Yale are so supportive and empowering. And looking at Vicky Chun, looking at AD Chun and seeing her success, but also knowing that she is so supportive of me as a student athlete and as a woman. So I just like to say that I think I've grown so much in the last couple of years, and really the last year more so than anything. And the AAPI community is reeling right now. I think we're grieving for so much, and it's just going to continue to happen, unfortunately. And that's just a result of this continued rhetoric, this continued idea of just wanting to blame somebody, and that's just really unfortunate and devastating.
Patrick?
Yeah, I think what we've recognized this past year is that I don't think the country is as far along in specific areas as we had hoped we were. I was born in the Philippines. We came here in 1972 when I was about 6 months old. I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C. In terms of my own experiences, there were some tough moments for me growing up of being accused of living in trees and eating dogs and cats, that's based on what people stereotyped Filipinos at that point in time, and as we grew up, I think that those stereotypes just didn't go away in terms of college and things like that. It's a tough thing to see that it takes something tragic to bring it to the forefront. And I think what's important, and I know we'll get to it later on the AAPI Alliance, is, we need continued action. We don't need reaction to these events. We need people to continue to want to work on these issues outside of when crisis occurs or when tragedy occurs. And continuing to have these conversations, I think, is what's most important in how we do things and how we educate other people, let people know that these occurrences are every day. And it's not just the most tragic things that are happening, but it's, again, the stereotypes of, you must be smart in math and sciences. There's no way you play sports, right? That's just not part of it all. And I think those more and more we have these conversations, the better we will understand. And it's not just about AAPI, it's about every other social issue out there that we just need to continue to tackle and talk about.
So, Amy, let's go back. It was 1978, President Carter initiated this, and in 1990, there was a Heritage Month that was created. I don't want to put, 1 month over the other, but let's be honest, it is not known as much. It is not celebrated as much. If anything, our educational system is very stereotypical and very surface. How much do you think, I think Chelsea was just saying like that these horrific events that are happening all the time and have happened regardless of the pandemic, how much can this be spun into a re-education, a redefining of an awareness of the Asian American Pacific Islander community?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy. I think it's imperative. I mean, I believe that the universe aligns certain things, right, for us, and the timing of AAPI Heritage Month at the same time while Congress is in session, while they're taking up this bill, while some of the worst of the anti-Asian hate crimes have occurred, at least that we are aware of it, because the news media started to finally pay more attention to it. I think those are all coming together at the right time, if you will, to inspire action, to inspire change, and hopefully do something that, lives much more than just 1 month. I hate to admit it, but it wasn't until a few years ago that I even knew about AAPI Heritage Month. And so as a AAPI individual, that maybe says a little bit about me, but I also think it says a lot about how this country and how our different, whether educational institutions, corporations, or what have you, have celebrated this month over the last couple of decades since it was originated. So I think with anything, it's going to require people's commitment to change and doing the work behind the scenes in the other 11 months. And that's something that, I've talked to Patrick, and I know what Vicky's doing at Yale. And so I know what Chelsea's been a part of there. But it's going to require everyone, not just AAPI individuals, of course, but allies as well. But to do the work every single day.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, to your point, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush various parts of the country, but I feel fortunate. I live in New England, so in Connecticut and Rhode Island, and I have seen Stop Asian Hate signs on lawns, and maybe that is across the country. I don't know, but I'm sort of glad to see that we're seeing that. It's awful that it's taken this to see that. Before we, I want to dive into obviously what we're doing in the student athlete space. But just if you can just comment on that, Chelsea and Patrick, of just what you've seen in the public space, maybe in your communities, that has hopefully, made you feel at least a little bit better about the greater community, that people are rallying around this issue. Chelsea?
Yeah, I'd love to start. So I've never actually seen a Stop Asian Hate Crimes or any sign like that. That said, I actually recently spoke and I got in contact with my high school. They reached out to me. There is a student against racism coalition that started at my high school, and they asked me to come talk, and it was really eye-opening and really, to that matter, inspiring, because I'm a part of a group very similar on campus, and to know that it's in as wide of a neighborhood as I grew up in and as wide as a school that I went to, that a group like this exists is really just, I think, a step in the right direction. I think it came with a lot of pushback. I talked with the administrator behind it, and she was a previous teacher of mine, and she was like, yeah, we had to change our logo. We've just received a lot of pushback. But that said, the resilience that this group has had, I've talked with them quite often. It's really just in that sense, I'm really proud to have been a part of a high school that, while there is pushback, accepts and is recognizing just what needs to be done and the change that needs to occur. So I just want to, shout out to them that they are, it's a step in the right direction. And I think more schools can learn from this, especially schools, that are very close to me, that, I know this would just never pass in any other school. So I want to give just praise for the acknowledgement and the just the action that's been taking place. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Patrick?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I enjoy the profession that we're in is the community that moves toward action when things like this occurs. And I think you're seeing it, whether it's Division 1, 2, or 3, that commissioners, athletic directors, the student athletes, whether it's through SAC or through their teams, they're picking up ways to take action and responding toward, again, another social injustice thing that they believe in and they know that they want to bring to light. Back to what Amy was talking about earlier, I think when we're talking about systemic and cultural challenges that we have to address, it has to be continual, and it has to be something where everyone is a part of it, whether you're part of AAPI or you're an ally or you're just a part of our community, right? So I have seen such an embrace when it comes to social issues through the NCAA organizations, conferences, institutions, and again, I like to commend those who have also supported AAPI through this difficult time.
I didn't speak on my experience at Yale, but I just want to, I was a part of SAC, so I was the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Subcommittee leader this past year. And, you know, the entire community at Yale, I think, has been so supportive and encouraging of the work that I've done and the work that, you know, SAC has done as a whole. Our main motivation this past year was to tackle the social injustice that had racked our country, you know, address Black Lives Matter, address the now AAPI community hate crimes. And I think now as I enter next year, I'll be the president of SAC. You know, that's something that's at the forefront of my mind and something that I am passionate about. And I just am so happy to have somebody like AD Chun, who has explicitly expressed her support and her dedication to helping SAC as a whole, helping athletics become more inclusive and just promising to make that change. So very happy.
So Amy, let's take that, what Chelsea's talking about, and put it on the practical side. What is being and can be done in the college athletics space to draw awareness to this real pressing issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's using the tools that exist. Like, you know, this podcast is a wonderful opportunity for Patrick, Chelsea, and I to talk about this and bring exposure to all of the folks in the audience that listen to this on a regular basis. But then, you know, working with, as Chelsea says, AD Chun and Patrick Chun, who's the AD at Washington State, the three of us have been in touch over the last few years, seeing each other at NACDO or the NCAA convention talking about this. And, you know, we should do something. And then we go on because we all have our full-time jobs and because there hasn't been this like moment or cause for action, this inflection point like we've had in the last year. But we had it in the last year, right? And the three of us finally said, you know what, it's either now or never. We've got to put up or shut up. And we're either going to do something or we're not. And so we committed to launch, and we did it earlier this month, the AAPI Athletics Alliance, or for AAPI for short. And so that is something that we are doing in this college space. I don't have the roadmap for you, Andy, yet, but the initial objective is simply to get our arms around how many individuals identify as AAPI in college sports and across all three divisions. We just have there's no centralizing or organizing body right now to understand the population that work in college sports. You know, there's only 2 Division I ADs, and Pat and Vicky that we're aware of right now, but we know there are more individuals all throughout the athletics department staff, throughout conference office staff. And so that's been our initial push, is just to get our arms around what is the size of the demographic that we're talking about, and then to identify allies as well. And just in the first couple of weeks since launching, I have to say, like, I've been blown away by the contacts and emails and text message or DMs on Twitter. And even I went into the office yesterday, you know, we've been working mostly remote, but I went into the office yesterday and there was a note card from an assistant or associate AD for football at a Power 5 school, reaching out and saying thank you for starting for AAPI. And it's things like that we are starting to establish a connection and community that has been sorely missing, in my view, in college athletics.
Patrick?
Couldn't agree more with what Amy just said. It's an interesting thing. I've been in college athletics since 1996, and just trying to think through who the AAPI admins, coaches that I've worked with along the way, and student athletes. There's just no central place, and so I think for AAPI is going to be an amazing opportunity for us to get a collective and start working together and providing resources that we need, and providing mentorship and providing who knows what else is out there that we might be able to do. You know, I think in terms of the other things that we can do throughout the NCAA, through conferences, institutions, I think it's working with Office of Inclusion at the NCAA, working with your conference office. To me, National SAC is such a driving force in anything that we do, that if they champion an initiative, it's going to take off. And so, Chelsea, I'm excited for you to take over as president for D1 SAC. It's an important time for so many issues right now for us. But working with and being intentional about what we're trying to do. The NEWMAC is specifically doing diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. We did about 6 series this year, and we're going to extend that into the next 5 years as part of our strategic plan. And our institutions are buying into that. And I think that's what we're hoping to do. And we get support through, like I said, the NCAA Office of Inclusion. And I'm happy and excited to work with Amy, Vicky, and Patrick on it for AAPI as well. Division III, Amy said, we're not sure how many are in Division I. I have zero idea how many are in Division III, and it'll be good to have some sort of foundation and central network to work off of.
So I'm a huge proponent of diversifying, regardless of whether it's a corporation, athletic department, conference, in our world, because if there's not someone at the table, then the room changes. If it's all men, you're going to have, I'm not saying always, locker room talk or whatever, but if there's a woman there, things may be tempered down, hopefully. And I think that is true in the space of, someone who's African-American, who's someone's Asian-American, and so on. For you, Chelsea, this is actually a space where Patrick and Amy, and you mentioned Patrick out at Washington State, it's probably on one hand or two that we know of. I can't honestly say D2, D3 that I know everyone, but there are fewer administrators at the highest level who are from the AAPI community. So as a student athlete, Chelsea, what does it say to you when you see people like Patrick, like Amy, who are essentially trailblazers in this space, basically decision makers that are in the room?
For me, growing up, I couldn't think of one Asian American Pacific Islander that I really looked up to beside my parents or relatives. That said, now that I'm in college, that I'm a rising junior, I look at Vicky and I am empowered by her. I'm empowered by the position that she's taken up, by the glass wall that she's really just shattered. She doesn't fit the bill of what you think an AD of a D1 school would look like. You look at her and you're like, okay, she's probably just like a coach or, somebody not as highly respected as she deserves to be looked at, right? And I see her and I see the things that she's done for Yale. And even beyond that, I was already such a supporter of her for what she's done at Yale, for her commitment to not cutting sports in the pandemic, just commitment to sports in general. I looked at her and I have so much respect for her. But then I learned that what she was doing for the AAPI community. For me, learning about the 4 AAPI is relatively new for me. That said, after the events of Atlanta, she hosted a town hall with coaches, with faculty, with student athletes. And that was one of the most memorable experiences I've had at Yale. We were all reeling on the call, so emotional. Like, I remember talking and I couldn't even talk. I was crying. I was so emotional. But there was just this general sense of community that existed. And I knew like 2 people on the call, Vicky and, a fellow student athlete of mine. And, we talked and there was just so much there were so many similar experiences that we've had as, just a community, and just understanding and, recognizing that, there's so many people that, lack that community, that just lack the support and lack the, just the community. There's just nobody to talk to really just grieve and to accept the situation. And, now that community is rising, now that 4 AAPI is in the works and has been established, that's huge. And I'm so excited and really just honored to be a part of. I look forward to joining that community. I look forward to meeting other AAPI members or other student athletes or administrators. And I look forward to just building a sense of community, because I think it's something that's just been missing for so long.
And I'm going to tell you, Chelsea, I actually was in Atlanta when that horrific crime occurred. And it was initially in the local coverage, because of where these women worked, it was completely biased in terms of, it was not initially reported as a hate crime. And that's a whole nother layer of biased coverage, and not thinking initially that this could be a hate crime, and something the AAPI community, I'm sure, has had to deal with for decades. But I want to get back to my original point, Amy and Patrick. What's it like, Amy? You go in the room and you're the only person that's an Asian American.
Yeah, like Chelsea, I grew up in a very white community, and I was adopted. So my family that I know was white. I have a sister who's also adopted from Korea. We're not biological sisters, but other than her and a couple other people in our school and our church when I was growing up, they were all white. They were mostly white, and so I was conditioned early on to be exposed to those situations, Andy, where I was the only or one of a couple Asian people in the room or in the classroom, certainly playing sports. I didn't see anyone that looked like me. And so you just sort of like accept that as, for better or worse, you accept that as the norm, and you just go about your life. And it wasn't until, honestly, in my own development and journey as a person, and maturation as a person, hopefully I'm a little bit more mature today than I was then, but to understand some of the real negative impacts that other people in the AAPI community have faced. Like I said earlier, I've been really fortunate, I think, to not have been the subject of anything too or overtly negative. And so there's an education and awakening, even on my part, as I sit here today in the middle of my career, that I'm learning about the experiences from people like Chelsea who have dealt with it, who are more open talking about it while they're in college in ways that I didn't have that community or network. So I think it's just something that you get used to, Andy, like everything else. It doesn't make it right or wrong. But you have to, figure out a way to get through life successfully, right? And we all have to adapt to our environment and our circumstances. And so I think now, as I'm just much more aware of those things, it is being even more aware of my role in this job as an Asian American, and using the platform that I have, however big or small it might be, to acknowledge and be more visible about it in ways that I just did not do earlier in my career. And so I think that's something that I'm just certainly more aware of. I'll still only be the only Asian American when I go back into our AD room or in our commissioner meetings or things like that. That's not going to change overnight. And, I get it. But the fact that I'm more aware, that my colleagues are more aware, I think that's the type of progress that we're hoping for. It's incremental. This is going to take time to overcome. But I think as long as the conversation has started, as long as we don't allow the conversation to end, I think is the most important thing.
Patrick, what would have happened when you were at Wheaton if you were outspoken, an activist in a positive manner in which Chelsea is? I mean, what would have happened if you had taken that stance when you were playing college athletics?
That's a great question. Wheaton is very supportive of social issues, LGBTQ community. I imagine they would have supported me if it was something critical that I felt was an important topic to address. It's a great institution from that perspective. Going to Amy's point, for me, what I think that I've learned through the years is I have a greater responsibility to now more than ever to champion AAPI. It's one of those moments of all of the other social issues that I've championed in my seat, whether it was currently as the commissioner at the NEWMAC, but why haven't I done more for AAPI? And I think that that's where I need to, be a little bit more reflective and take more opportunities similar to this today, speaking about it, working with Amy, Vicky, and Patrick for AAPI to do more. But to your original question, Andy, when you're fortunate to go to institutions that support issues that are critical and important to students, I think it's a positive thing. So I was a student athlete in the 90s, early 90s, and just thinking through what we were dealing with then. We did have the Asian Student Association and things like that. We weren't super active, but we were there, and I think that they would support me if I thought there was something critical and that I could organize and create some sort of program around a topic that was important to me. So,
Chelsea, obviously, so much that we're talking about in terms of this anti-Asian hate crime bill and incidents that we've seen that have gone viral have been physical violence. I think too often we don't pause and realize how hurtful words are. Tell me, how hurtful are they?
I mean, I think anybody can answer this question. Words are hurtful, first and foremost. They have so much power and impact behind them. People disregard, things like, oh, your eyes are small. Or you're like, for me, it was always, your eyes are pretty big for an Asian. It was just like comments like that, and now they've really just kind of transitioned into all the rhetoric that is surrounding COVID-19 and Asian Americans for that matter. I think just it's so damaging and disparaging to like see the news articles that people are driving by and screaming profanities and slurs at just normal people on the sidewalk. My family, my mom's side of the family lives in Atlanta. I have a grandma who right after I learned about the Atlanta shootings, I called her and I was like in tears, and she doesn't speak a lot of English, and unfortunately I don't speak Chinese. I'm learning, but I am not fluent. And it was just like, how would she deal with that? Like, I wonder, because she doesn't understand. I mean, she knows when somebody's going to be aggressive with her, but the word side, for so many Asian Americans, and like the elderly have been attacked. And so many of them don't speak English, and yet they can feel the hate behind these words. Like they're not naive. They're not ignorant to the fact that these words carry power and they carry a negative impact. And I think just the rhetoric is so negative right now, and it's just horrible to hear. And there's so many instances of these hate crimes happening, of these just the words. It's not even violence that's happening. It's just the profanities and slurs. Like I really have no solution towards it. I don't know how to combat it, like without combating hate with hate. Like that's going to do nothing, right? But I just wish people understood that the COVID flu, the Kung flu, it's not just words. There's a very negative impact with that. You're disparaging an entire community. It's not just Chinese people that are the cause. Like that's not anything. And it's for the fact that people believe that and they're okay with saying stuff like that, Kung flu, just something as simple as that. Like it's disgusting for me to hear and to read about. And I just wish people would understand the impact that their words have, and just stop, just educate yourself.
Amy?
Yeah, I think Chelsea's exactly right. I think a long time, if you set apart the physical violence part of it and the words part, and you look back and how I think the discrimination part has persisted for so long, it's a lot more subtle than what we see, at least that I've experienced when you think about discrimination against other races, where there is, I think, more coded language that built into the systemic racism for that might be effectuating other races. But for Asian Americans, at least in my experience, it's the slanted eyes. It's, why are your eyes closed when you're in a picture? They're always closed. As Charlie said earlier, you should be smart in math and science and good in those types of things. You look so young. I've had experiences even as commissioner where I was mistaken for an intern or the daughter of one of my board members. So it's things like that accumulate over time that are, they're not causing physical pain to me, but they leave a mark and they certainly sit in my memory forever. And the accumulation of those things for certain people can have really damaging effects. And those are the types of things that it might not be mean-spirited, because when people make jokes, they're trying to be funny, but they leave a mark and they do damage on people's psyche and their outlook on life. And those are the types of things that I'm hoping we now have much more awareness that those can be as damaging as pushing someone on the street. We've got to recenter our view mindset on what discrimination looks like. It doesn't have to be so targeted and filled with venom, but it's a joke that can cause as much damage as anything else.
Patrick?
Yeah, I think ignorance perpetuates stereotypes, and then it normalizes it for everyone else to continue to say the things that we've been saying all along here today, and it comes across as a joke or matter of fact or whatever it might be, and then again it just makes it okay to continue to say it. So I think having these conversations, making sure we continue to have these conversations are important. I have twin 15-year-old daughters, and it's been a tough year. I really had an awakening from the perspective that I thought they were going to be growing up in a society community that was so different than what I grew up in, and it's so much further behind than I had thought it was, right? So we had made such strides from a social perspective in this country, but to see what's happened over the last 18 months, it's been rough to see that. Since we're talking about this, I was walking on the street. Luckily, it was just by myself. I wasn't with my daughters, but a car stopped, and these people in the car were yelling at me to go back to China. And again, I'm a Filipino American, so it's not exactly where I'm from. So it's ignorance. And it makes it okay. There's the entitlement issues out there. So the words are tougher because you make it okay. You make it okay to continue to say the things that others say, and I don't think you check yourself because you do think you're being funny, or you're just trying to. Sometimes it's a compliment that you look young, those kind of things. But it's hard when you've lived with it for me. It'll be 49 years this summer. So and the continued, you would think it would have stopped at some point, Andy. And I think it's hard to see, and I don't wish this upon my daughters, in terms of their adult years and what they're going to go through at all.
So I want to end with this, hopefully, in a positive manner, in that allies, this should not be your problem. This should be our problem as a society, not just as Americans, but as human beings on this shared planet. So if we can go around our Zoom room, Amy, Patrick, and I want to end with you, Chelsea, because you're there peer to peer. I mean, you're with the student athletes, and especially as you ascend to your position as a head of SAC. What can allies in the college athletics space do for the AAPI community? Start with you, Amy.
Well, first, they can go to our website, foraapi.com, and register as an ally. We are intentional about that because we're trying to build a community of both affected individuals and allies, because we recognize, Andy, just like you said, that it's there's a shared responsibility to make this world a better place, But I think just generally is showing your support. Don't just put up a nice tweet or a logo or some graphic during the month of May. What are you going to do on June 1 to continue to show your support for the AAPI community? If you can do that and show that there's action in subsequent days and months and years ahead, I think that's going to be the most important thing for me, from my perspective, to keep this engine moving.
Patrick?
I think listen, learn, educate, show up, I think are all important things that we would ask from allies to be a part of what we're trying to do here. And the support is critical. Again, not just for AAPI, but any social issue that we're grappling with. It's just so important that we do address it as a community. So, support bringing programming to your institution or to your conference, attend seminars, and promote wherever you can. Again, I'll say what I started off with. It's not just about reacting to the moment. It's about the continued action and having a plan for continued action along the way. And if we could get allies to do that, I think we're going to be in a good place.
Yeah, I think the role of allies, and I appreciate that you recognize that it's really not our job to gain allies and to really just put the word out there. I think as an ally, for myself, as an ally of the Black community, you really just have to take initiative, attack the implicit bias that you have internally, address the implicit and explicit bias, unlearn what has been conditioned to be the norm, conditioned to be okay. You just have to take the initiative and hold yourself accountable, for all the people that want to help and support the AAPI community, join for AAPI, address the issue, target your own insecurities and, just the things that need to be addressed. I think it's going to be a gradual process. And I recognize and I support so many people that have taken those initial steps, that have done more than post, oh, stop Asian hate. Don't be performative. I think it's just the step in the right direction is to just really commit yourself to learning and unlearning It's going to be a gradual process, but, I think it's necessary to be more inclusive. It can't continue these sentiments and feelings. It's horrible. So I would just say, it's for an ally out there, if you want to be an ally, commit yourself to the time that it's going to take to unlearn all the norms that you've grown up with for however long you've been on this earth. Take the time to learn how you should address people, how when you ask somebody where they're from, when they say Texas, you're like, oh, very cool, like I'm also from Texas. It's not like, no, where are you from? Just stop that, like, just entitlement. It's not okay. And just respect, be kind to others, and continue to learn and unlearn.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, I think Amy and Patrick would agree with me that we're in good hands with leaders like Chelsea, continuing to take the baton. And that's what it's going to take from one generation to the next, not putting us too far out in that generation, because the three of us are obviously within an age range here. But Chelsea, most importantly for you as a student athlete, I hope the athlete part is going to come back strong next season, and we'll see you on the tennis court competing for Yale and going for an Ivy League championship. So Chelsea, Patrick, Amy, really appreciate you taking some time to discuss this. This is not just a day. This is not just a month. This should be 365. This should be 12 months. This should be, as Chelsea said, if you need it, re-educate yourself. Words matter. And obviously we need to come together as a community, not just at one time of the year. So as always, I really appreciate all of your time. Everyone can go to ncaa.org/social series, where all our social series are archived over the last year plus. As always, you can download those and check them out. We also have a podcast version of each one of these episodes. Stay safe, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.